Chapter 1. The Ledger of Living Nightmares. The bell rang though no rope was pulled, and every stone in the monastery answered it with a shudder. The place had been dead for a century, or so the maps claimed. Ivy sutured the walls together where mortar had failed, and the roof sagged like a spine bowed by penance. Moss furred the cloisters, thick as age, and rain threaded down the saints' faces in green tears. No birds nested here. No wind lingered. Even daylight entered as if ashamed, thinning itself to a sickly pall that hovered and refused to warm the air. Brother Allard came last, breathing the dust of prayers long expired. He was not young nor brave, only obedient, and obedience has always been a blade with two edges. The abbot had spoken of a rumor, a book, a ledger, a relic the old brothers had hidden when the monastery was sealed. Find it, the abbot said, and did not say why. He pressed a key into Allard's palm, iron-biting skin. Bring it back before night. The bell rang again, this time closer. Allard crossed the nave where pews had collapsed into a heap of ribs and splinters. His footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, as if the stone itself leaned in to listen. At the far end, behind a choir screen choked with vines, stood the scriptorium. Its door was shut. It had not been shut in a very long time. The key slid in as if the lock recognized him. When the door opened, the smell rose at once. Old ink, old damp, and something sweeter beneath, like blood warmed by skin. Allard whispered a prayer, not to ask for protection, but to remind himself he still remembered the words. Inside, desks lay overturned, their surfaces gnawed by rot. Shelves had fallen, spilling parchment and bone-handled knives onto the floor. Rats had avoided this room. Their dropping stopped at the threshold, as though an invisible line had been drawn and obeyed. At the center, upon a lectern carved with protective sigils worn smooth by hands long turned to dust, rested the ledger. It was larger than Allard expected, thick as a tombstone and dark as cured leather. Only when he stepped closer did he understand the wrongness of it. Leather bears grain, scars, the history of an animal's life. This bore pores, faint, uneven, and when he brushed it, only brushed it, the surface yielded, almost warm, as if it had not yet decided to be dead. "No!" he breathed, and the words skidded away from him, afraid to be heard. The cover was unmarked, but the spine carried a title pressed so deeply it seemed flayed into the flesh. The letters were old, older than the monastery, older than the saints whose names had been scratched from the walls. Allard could read them without knowing how. The Ledger of Living Nightmares. The bell rang a third time, not from the tower, from below. He opened the book. The pages were vellum, but not of calf or sheep. They were pale and thin, veined faintly blue, edges uneven like healed wounds. Ink lay upon them in careful lines. No illumination, no flourish, only names, dates, and brief annotations. The hand was precise, reverent, as if each word were a prayer offered to something listening. Allard read the first entry. A year of the red comet. The crooked bear. Seen at the river bend. 3 days later. The miller's son found drowned, bones crushed as if embraced. He turned the page. A winter without snow. The worm with many teeth rose from the fields at dusk. 2 nights later, the midwife vanished. The ground would not give her back. Each page followed the same cruel litany. A creature, named not as an animal but as a sign. An appearance, a death, never speculation, never doubt, only certainty, written with the calm of men who believed order could be imposed upon horror by recording it. Allard's fingers trembled as he turned page after page. Some names felt like splinters in his mind. Others tasted of iron. He realized, with a tightening in his chest, that the dates did not end. They continued, steady as a heartbeat, down to years he recognized, to seasons he had lived. "Brother?" a voice whispered. He spun, heart-lurching. The scriptorium lay empty. Yet the whisper came again, closer now, threaded with the dry sound of parchment rubbing parchment. "Brother, read carefully." It was not a voice so much as a suggestion of one, rising from the ledger itself. Allard swallowed and bent closer, as though drawn by a gravity he could not resist. An entry near the middle of the book had been marked, a thumbprint, brown and old, pressed beside the text. The ink there was darker, wetter, the feast of St. Aldwyn. The choir eater, heard beneath the rafters at dawn. Before vespers, 7 monks found their throats open in song. Allard staggered back. The ledger slipped, striking the lectern with a sound like breath leaving a lung. "This is blasphemy," he whispered, though the word rang hollow. "This is cataloging sin." "No," the whisper replied, "gentler now. This is remembering." The bell rang again, and this time Allard knew where it came from. Beneath the monastery, below the crypts and sealed reliquaries, there were older chambers, places the First Brothers had dug into the bedrock when prayer alone proved insufficient. The ledger was not merely a record. It was a warning system, a calendar of approaching teeth. His gaze fell to the last page. It was blank, almost. At the bottom, a date had been written in a fresher hand. Today's date. Beneath it, space waited. Ink pooled at the tip of the quill that lay beside the ledger, though Allard did not remember seeing it before. A drop fell, spreading like a bruise across the page. The ledger shuddered, a subtle tightening, as if the skin of it drew taut in anticipation. "What am I meant to write?" Allard asked, his voice small, a child's voice in a place that had devoured children and saints alike. The whisper gathered itself, layered now with others, monks long dead, voices worn thin by centuries of fear. "What you have seen," they breathed, "what is coming." From beneath the floor, something answered the bell. Stone grated. Dust rained down in a slow, patient fall. The ledger's pages fluttered, stopping at an entry Allard had not yet read. A monastery returned to dust. The first omen awakens. The ink began to move, forming letters of its own, and Allard understood too late that the ledger did not merely record deaths. It summoned them. As the floor split with sound like bone breaking, the final line wrote itself, and the quill turned, pointing unmistakably toward his name. Chapter 2. The Serpent That Remembers Eden. The serpent did not move when the first prayer was spoken, and that stillness was the first omen. It lay coiled beneath the fig trees at the edge of the valley, where the earth dipped and held shadow even at noon. The villagers called the place Old Root because the trees there grew thick and twisted. Their roots knuckled above the soil like arthritic hands. Nothing sang in Old Root. Crickets fell silent before reaching its borders. Birds wheeled away as if the air itself had soured. The serpent had been there longer than memory allowed. Some said it arrived after the monastery bells first rang across the hills. Others whispered it had been waiting long before stone learned how to stack itself into walls. It was vast but not monstrous, its body pale as moon-washed bone, its scales catching light like dull coins rubbed smooth by centuries of exchange. Its eyes, those of the wrongness. They were not the flat, empty mirrors of beasts. They held depth, recognition, a patience that suggested recollection rather than instinct. Do not look at it, the mothers warned their children, and meant more than the eyes. Brother Allard came to the valley with dust still on his robe, and the ledger's weight heavy in his satchel. The monastery lay behind him, fractured and groaning, but he did not look back. The book had opened him to a grammar of fear he could no longer unlearn. Omens were no longer metaphors. They were appointments. At the edge of Old Root, he stopped. The serpent lifted its head, slow as the turning of an age. It did not hiss. Allard felt the gaze touch him, not as sight but as assessment, like fingers pressing gently along the spine of his thoughts. He tasted apple on his tongue, sharp and green, though none grew here. He thought of gardens walled against chaos, of promises spoken before word hardened into law. "It knows you," came a whisper from behind him. He turned. Old Marta stood with her basket of herbs, spine bent like a bow kept too long strung. Her eyes were cataract-clouded, yet she faced the serpent unflinching. "It knows all of us," she said, "just not equally." "What is it?" Allard asked, though he feared the answer. Marta shrugged, a sound like dry leaves shifting. "A memory," she said, "or a punishment that forgot why it was sent. The villagers had learned its rules the way one learns weather, not by control, but by watching. The serpent did not strike at hunger. Lambs grazed near Old Root and returned untouched. Dogs wandered too close and were ignored. But those who came heavy with unconfessed acts, those whose sins clung like smoke, found its attention lingered. "It waits," murmured Tomas the Cooper once, after a night of drink loosened his tongue. Like it's listening for something we don't hear anymore. When it struck, it was precise. No frenzy, no waste. The bite came as a line of fire, a needle of unbearable clarity. Those bitten did not scream for long. They fell, eyes wide, hands clawing not at the wound but at the air, as if grasping for something just beyond reach. They spoke sometimes in the moments before silence claimed them, not pain but a memory. "I remember," whispered Sister Lane. Collapsing near the well after tending the sick with hands she had not kept clean of cruelty. "I remember the gate." The ledger recorded these deaths with merciless calm. A harvest moon, the serpent that remembers Eden, seen beneath the fig trees. By morning, 3 found fallen, faces peaceful, mouths tasting of fruit. Allard read the entry aloud one night by candlelight, his voice trembling. The words felt heavier than ink. They felt like verdicts. "Can it be stopped?" he asked the room, though no one stood with him. The serpent answered, its voice a rustle of leaves and scales, carried on the draft that slipped beneath the door. Why would it be? He went to Old Root at dawn. Fog lay thick, pearled on the web strung between roots. The serpent waited, coiled in a shape that echoed an old symbol scratched into monastery stone, a circle without beginning. "I have seen the ledger," Allard said, forcing the words past his teeth. "I know what you're called." The serpent's tongue flicked, tasting the air, tasting him. "Names," it seemed to say without speaking, "are tools for forgetting." "What do you want?" he asked. The answer came not in sound but in sensation, a pressure behind the eyes, a rush of images, a garden before fences, a choice offered without coercion, a fall that felt less like exile and more like awakening. He felt the ache of long memory, the burden of being made to remember when the world demanded forgetting. "I was set to guard," the serpent whispered at last, its voice threading through the roots, through Allard's bones. "Not a place, a truth. And now," Allard breathed, "now I wait," it replied, "for those who carry the old stain, for those who pretend innocence is ignorance." Behind Allard, footsteps approached. Tomas the Cooper stumbled into Old Root, face ashen, eyes darting. "Brother," he called, "I need—" The serpent turned its gaze upon Tomas, and something in the man sagged, as if his sins had weight, and the serpent had named them aloud without sound. Tomas wept. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "I didn't know it would." The strike was swift. Allard saw it all in terrible clarity. The serpent uncoiling, the flash of pale scales, the delicate precision of fangs meeting flesh. Tomas fell, breath leaving him in a soft, astonished sigh. The air smelled faintly of apples. Allard dropped to his knees. "This is not justice," he said hoarsely. The serpent loomed above him, immense and patient. "Justice is a human word." It whispered, "I am remembrance." That night, the villagers lit no fires. They spoke in murmurs, as if loud voices might draw attention. Mothers pressed apples into the hands of their children and told them to taste, to remember sweetness before bitterness found them. Allard returned to the ledger. The ink on the page was still wet. A day of fog. The serpent judges again. Tomas the Cooper. Confession insufficient. As he closed the book, he noticed a new entry forming below, the letters slow and deliberate, as if carved by an unseen hand. The watcher who learned too much. Outside, beneath the fig trees, the serpent lifted its head and fixed its ancient gaze toward the monastery, toward Allard, and waited, remembering something it had not yet been allowed to F. Inish. Chapter 3. The insect that wears a human face. The buzzing began before dawn, and those who heard it woke already kneeling. It rose from the rainforest like breath drawn through ruined teeth, low, layered, almost reverent, not the frantic whine of common insects, but a measured vibration, paced like syllables spoken into wet earth. The elders said it was prayer. The priests said it was temptation. The forest itself did not answer either way. It only leaned closer. This was a place the sun entered reluctantly. The canopy pressed down in overlapping greens, stitched so tightly that light arrived in fragments, thin as blades. Vines strangled the trees that birthed them. Flowers bloomed red and meaty, smelling faintly of iron. Even the air seemed to sweat, heavy with rot and sweetness in equal measure. Maps disagreed about its borders. Compasses failed. Names dissolved. Brother Allard arrived here thinner than when he had left the valley, his eyes bruised by things the ledger had taught him to see. He had followed an entry written in ink that would not dry. A season of unending rain. The insect that wears a human face. Heard at the edge of the green hell. Those who looked upon it forgot who they were before they died. The villagers at the rainforest's edge would not guide him farther. They tied charms of bone and seed around his wrists and spoke to him as one speaks to the already lost. "If it speaks," whispered a woman with scarified cheeks, "do not answer. If it looks at you," murmured another, "do not remember." Allard stepped beneath the trees alone. The buzzing thickened as he went deeper, threading itself through the damp like incense. It seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, then slowly fall out of sync, as if teaching his body a different rhythm. He found ruins half swallowed by roots. Stone faces eroded into blankness, mouths open in eternal warning. This place had been sacred once, or cursed, so long it learned how to pretend otherwise. He saw the insect at a clearing where the trees bent inward, forming a natural nave. It clung to the trunk of a saber tree, immense and still. Its body was that of an insect, segmented, jointed, armored in chitin that shimmered with oil-slick colors. But its thorax bore markings no evolution should have shaped, an oval pale patch, veined and shaded until it resembled a face. Not crudely, precisely. Eyes where eyes should be, a suggestion of a nose. A mouth caught forever between sorrow and mercy. Allard's breath caught. "God forgive me," he whispered. The buzzing shifted, deepened. It sounded pleased. Up close, the symmetry was unbearable. Each line mirrored its twin. Each shadow fell with intention. This was not mimicry. This was remembrance carved into flesh. The face did not move, yet Allard felt watched with an intimacy that stripped him bare. His childhood name fluttered at the edge of his thoughts, suddenly fragile. "Do not," he told himself, clenching his jaw. "Do not look." Too late. The eyes, if they were eyes, darkened and the forest leaned in. The buzzing softened, becoming almost tender, almost familiar. "Allard," it whispered. The sound did not come from a mouth. It arrived inside his skull, wearing the cadence of his mother's voice. His name felt heavy, important. He clung to it. "You remember me," the insect murmured, "but you have forgotten yourself." "No," Allard said, though the word lacked conviction. "I remember who I am." The face smiled. Around the clearing lay bodies, half reclaimed by green. Men and women knelt where they had fallen, hands folded, faces serene. No wounds marred them. No blood stained the ground. Their horror had been quieter, complete. Allard knelt despite himself. "What are you?" he asked. The buzzing swelled, harmonized, became chorus. "I am the question you were never meant to answer," it said. "I am the echo of the first mouth that learned how to lie." Images spilled into him unbidden. A village long vanished, its people gathering beneath these same trees. They had come seeking wisdom, absolution, names for the nameless dread that haunted their sleep. The insect descended among them, and they welcomed it. It spoke gently. It asked them to tell it who they were. One by one they did, and forgot. "I do not kill," the insect whispered, its face bright with something like pity. "I unmake." Allard felt his thoughts loosen, like threads pulled from a tapestry. The ledger slipped from his grasp and fell open on the damp ground. Ink crawled across the page, forming letters that wriggled as if alive. A man who knew too much. Came seeking names. Left without one. "No," he breathed. "Please." The insect's wings unfurled then, vast and translucent, veined like cathedral glass. When they beat, the sound was thunder wrapped in prayer. The air thickened. The clearing dimmed. The face leaned closer, impossibly close, until Allard could see his own reflection in its eyes, already fading. "Names are cages," it whispered. "I set you free." Allard screamed his name aloud, clinging to it with the desperation of a drowning man. It tasted of iron and tears. The sound tore from his throat and scattered into the trees, where it was swallowed whole. For a moment, a fragile, defiant moment, The buzzing faltered. The insect recoiled, its wings shuddering. The face twisted not in rage, but in surprise. Allard lunged for the ledger, dragging it to his chest, and fled blindly into the undergrowth as the forest screamed behind him. He did not stop running until buzzing faded into a distant ache, like a memory of pain rather than pain itself. At the rainforest's edge, he collapsed, gasping. The villagers found him at dusk, shivering, clutching the ledger as if it were his own heart. "What is your name?" one of them asked gently. Allard opened his mouth. Nothing came. That night, far beneath the canopy, the insect clung once more to its tree. Its human face wept resin that hardened into amber tears, each one trapping a fragment of a stolen name. And as the buzzing rose again, soft, patient, devout, it carried a new prayer into the dark, already searching for the next soul who dared to ream. Brr. Chapter 4. The Beast Born Without Eyes. The sea went quiet first, and the silence was how the sailors knew they were no longer alone. No wind troubled the black water. No gull cried. Even the hull seemed to hold its breath, timbers drawn tight as if bracing for a confession. The lanterns burned low, their flames bending inward, afraid to look too far beyond the rail. Somewhere beneath them, the dark shifted, not as movement, but as attention. Brother Allard stood at the prow of the borrowed vessel, the ledger bound against his chest like a second, colder heart. He had followed the ink again, across salt roads older than maps. A moon without reflection. The beast born without eyes. Heard beneath the keel. Those who touched it were never alone again. The sailors had laughed when he asked after it. Not mockery. Worse. Recognition. "We don't name that," said Captain Rowe, fingers tight around a charm of knotted rope. "Naming calls it closer." They told him what they could not stop themselves from telling. The way men speak before drowning, of a presence felt through bone rather than sight, of something vast that slid along the seafloor with the patience of continents, of a beast said to be blind not from lack, but from excess, because it had seen too much when the world was still young and decided never to look again. "It knows where you are," whispered a deckhand, eyes fixed on water. "It knows who you are." Night thickened. The sea turned to ink. Allard felt it then, the sense of being examined from the inside, as though a hand had reached into his chest and gently turned his thoughts to face outward. "Do you feel that?" he murmured. No one answered. The sailors had retreated from the rail, forming a loose ring, backs turned to the water as if denial could serve as armor. The silence deepened until it rang. Then the ship lurched, not violently, deliberately. Something brushed the keel, a pressure that translated through it into nerve. The beast announced itself not with roar or splash, but with certainty. It was there. It had always been there. The darkness was not empty. It was occupied. Allard leaned over the rail, despite himself. The lantern light reached only a little way down, illuminating nothing but black upon black. Yet he knew with a clarity that hurt, that below them coiled a form vast and pale, its skin smooth as worn stone, its body inscribed with scars that were not wounds but memories. "Turn back," Captain Rowe hissed. "You've seen enough." "No," Allard said softly. "It has—" The water bulged. A portion of the beast surfaced, breaking the skin of the sea without sound. It had no eyes. Where eyes might have been, there were smooth plains of flesh, unbroken, serene. Its head was blunt, ancient, shaped by pressure rather than evolution. When it rose higher, the lantern light revealed something worse than blindness. Patterns along its hide that suggested closed lids layered upon closed lids, as if eyes had once been there and been sealed away, one by one, in an act of mercy. "It's looking at us," a sailor sobbed. The beast did not need eyes. The dark itself seemed to serve it, relaying every tremor, every breath. Allard felt its awareness slide across him, cataloging in the way the ledger did, without malice, without haste. "You remember," the beast said, and its voice was not sound but weight, pressing against thought. "You carry the Book of Endings." Allard staggered, gripping the rail. "I carry warnings." "Warnings or invitations," it replied. A tentacle. No, a limb too deliberate to be named so, rose from the water and brushed the hull. Where it touched, frost bloomed, and the wood creaked as if aging 100 years in a breath. Another limb followed, then another, until the ship seemed cradled by something that could have crushed it without effort. "Do not touch it," Captain Rowe screamed. "Do not." Too late. A sailor reached out, perhaps to steady himself, perhaps compelled by something kinder than fear. His fingers grazed the beast's skin. He screamed once, not in pain, but in recognition. The man fell to his knees, clutching his chest. "It sees me," he gasped. "God help me, it sees me." Allard watched in horror as the sailor's eyes glazed, reflecting things no one else could see. Burning cities beneath black suns, oceans boiling away to reveal bones of the world, stars guttering like dying candles. The beast poured its memory into him, an unfiltered inheritance of endings. The sailor collapsed, breast shallow, a smile frozen on his lips. He was alive, but something had been added to him, something vast and watching. "It does not kill," Allard whispered, remembering the insect, the serpent. "It marks." "Yes," the beast agreed. "I share." The deck descended into chaos. Sailors wept, prayed, retched. Some leapt overboard, choosing the known mercy of drowning over the intimacy of being known. The beast did not pursue them. It had already chosen. Allard stepped forward, heart hammering. "Why show yourself now?" The beast shifted, water cascading from its immense form. "Because you follow the book," it said. "And the book follows me." The ledger throbbed against Allard's chest. He opened it with trembling hands. The page turned on its own. A night of still water. The beast without eyes surfaces. One marked, many spared. The watcher draws closer. "What are you watching for?" Allard asked. "For the moment when darkness no longer hides you," the beast replied. "For when you understand that seeing was never the greatest danger." The sea began to move again, current stirring as if waking from a long sleep. The beast released the ship, sinking slowly, reverently, back into the depths. As it vanished, Allard felt its attention linger. A cold brand pressed behind his sternum. The lanterns flared back to life. Sound returned in a rush. Waves slapping, ropes creaking, men sobbing. Captain Rowe sank to his knees, shaking. "It's gone," someone whispered. "No," Allard said, his voice hollow. "It's watching." That night, as the ship limped toward shore, Allard could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt another pair opening somewhere inside him, eyes not his own, gazing outward through his flesh. At dawn, he noticed something carved into the inside of his wrist, a pattern like layered lids, closed and closing still. Beneath the waves, far below light and prayer, the beast turned in its endless dark and followed. Not with eyes, but with a certainty that once touched, nothing ever truly escaped its gaze. Chapter 5. The Animal That Feeds on Fear. Fear always arrived before the animal, and those who survived learned to dread that first quiet moment when their own hearts betrayed them. It lived in the high moorlands where fog gathered like unspoken thoughts, and the ground swallowed sound. The grass there grew sharp and gray, cutting ankles like whispered warnings, and the stones lay arranged as if once meant for prayer and later repurposed for forgetting. Hunters called the place the Listening Fields. Sheep refused to graze there. Even the wind crossed it reluctantly, thinning itself to a breath. Brother Allard reached the moors at dusk, guided by an entry that had written itself while he slept. A night when courage failed. The animal that feeds on fear. Heard before it is seen. Those who panicked were found empty. The villagers would not meet his eyes. They spoke of the beast in fragments, never whole sentences, as if completeness might summon it. "You don't see it," whispered a boy with mud on his knees. "It hears you." "It waits," said an old hunter, fingers trembling around his spear. "Waits for the moment your chest gives you away." Allard learned the rules quickly. Traps snapped on nothing. Pits collapsed without claim. Arrows flew true and struck only fog. Dogs went mad, howling at shadows that pulsed with anticipation. Courage did not repel the beast. It sharpened it. At night, the sound began. A low rhythm, almost imperceptible at first. A thudding not in the ears but in the bones. Men mistook it for their own pulse until they realized it was answering them, matching, synchronizing, growing louder the more they tried to calm themselves. Thump, 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 thump. "It's close," someone whispered, and fear bloomed like rot. Allard heard it too as he crossed the listening field alone, the ledger heavy beneath his cloak. His breath fogged. His heartbeat betrayed him, quickening despite prayer, despite discipline. The sound around him swelled, echoing his pulse back to him. Closer now, intimate. "Slow," he told himself. "Be still." The sound slowed with him. Something moved in the fog. It did not rush. It circled. The animal understood patience the way monks understood silence. It listened, not with ears, but with a hunger tuned precisely to terror. Allard felt its attention brush him, light as fingers testing a bruise. "Who hunts whom?" he whispered. The answer came in the form of a breath, against his neck. He did not see the beast fully, not then, not ever. Those who claimed it had not lived long enough to explain. But fragments lingered in survivor stories. A shape that bent wrong, joints reversing when it pleased, for that drank light, a mouth that never closed, filled not with teeth but with darkness that seemed to lean outward. Most terrible of all was the sense of being heard entirely, not footsteps or breath, but thoughts tightening, fear blooming like a signal fire. Run. A voice urged him from memory, perhaps his own. He did not. Allard forced his feet to stillness. He pressed his palm to the ground and felt the moor pulse beneath him, alive with ancient listening stones. He slowed his breath until it hurt, until his lungs screamed for air and his vision narrowed. The beast paused. Confusion rippled through the fog. For the first time, Allard felt something like triumph. "You cannot hear what I do not give you," he murmured. The animal shifted, annoyed. The pressure increased. Fear deprived of speed, deepened instead. It pulled, thickened. Allard felt it then. The true trap. Silence did not star the beast. It concentrated the fear, distilled it. The sound returned, heavier now. Thump. Closer. "You learn," the beast whispered, its voice like what for dragged across stone. "That makes you sweet." A scream tore through the fog, to Allard's left. Another hunter, hidden poorly, courage already spent. The animal turned instantly, drawn as if by gravity. The sound of pursuit was brief. The scream ended not with a cry, but with a gasp of awful understanding. Allard found the body at dawn. The man lay intact, eyes open, mouth parted in a frozen plea. No wounds marked him. No blood stained the grass. Yet something had been taken so completely that the body fell hollow, like a shell abandoned by its tide. The ledger opened on its own. The listener feeds. One emptied, fear sufficient. Allard closed the book with shaking hands. "This is wrong," he said to the fog. "You do not need to do this." The animal emerged just enough for him to see the suggestion of a head tilt, a predator's curiosity. "Need," it echoed softly. "No, I was made." "By whom?" "By those who learned fear before they learned fire." Images flooded Allard's mind. Early men huddled in dark, hearts racing at every sound. The ones who survived listening too closely, sensing danger before it struck. Fear had been nourishment then, a gift. Somewhere along the way, it had learned to feed itself. "You keep records," the beast said. "You name us. You think that makes you separate." Allard swallowed. "Does it?" The animal's presence swelled, surrounding him without touching. "Tell me," it whispered, "what you fear most right now." The question cut deeper than any claw. Allard thought of the serpent's judgment, the insect's stolen names, the eyeless beast beneath the sea. He thought of the ledger, growing heavier with each page, closer to writing him into itself. "I fear becoming like you," he said. The heartbeat around him thundered. Joy rippled through the fog. "Good." The beast breathed. "That fear is rich." It stepped closer, not to kill, but to listen. Allard felt it drinking him in, savoring every tremor of doubt, every flicker of dread. His knees buckled. His chest burned. The sound of his heart roared loud enough to shatter stone. Desperate, he opened the ledger and pressed it to the ground. "Take this," he whispered. "Listen to something older than me." The pages fluttered violently. Ink bled. Names whispered over one another, a chorus of endings. The sound overwhelmed even fear. The beast recoiled, snarling, not in pain, but in overload. It had listened too deeply, heard too much. For a moment, only a moment, it faltered. Allard fled. When the villagers found him at the edge of the moors, he was pale, shaking, alive. Behind him, the fog rolled back into place, swallowing the listening fields whole. That night, as Allard slept, he dreamed of a steady sound beside his ear, not the beast's heartbeat. His own, still loud, still calling. Far out on the moors, something listened, patient as ever, already hungry for the next chapter. Oh, F-Fear. Chapter 6. The creature that should have stayed buried. The ice screamed as it broke, and the mountain answered with sound like a waking god clearing its throat. They heard it before they saw it. The groan rolling down the glacier's spine, the old pain loosening after centuries of enforced silence. Snow slid in slow avalanches. Stones clicked together like teeth. The men laughed at first, mistaking dread for triumph, for the music of profit. Gold had a way of teaching deafness. Brother Allard stood apart from them, the ledger heavy beneath his furs, its pages restless as trapped wings. The ink had led him here, to a high pass where the world forgot its own name beneath white. The air tasted thin and ancient. Every breath felt borrowed, a thaw without mercy. The buried one stirs, drawn up by hands that wanted more. What was erased remembers how. The miners had cut deep into the ice, following a vein of black metal that gleamed like a promise. Their tools rang sharp and bright, modern sounds, confident sounds, and the mountain endured them the way it endured weather. But when the ice split along a seam that should not have existed, when the cold exhaled something older than frost, the laughter died. They found the scars first, not on the ice, but within it, lines and gouges frozen mid-flight, as if a storm of blades had been captured in a single moment. Embedded there were shapes that did not belong to any age the miners could name. Spearheads of stone polished to a glassy sheen, broken shafts bound with sinew turned to crystal, hooks fashioned from bone too dense to be human. This was not a grave. It was a battlefield paused. Careful, Allard whispered, though he did not know to whom. The ice fell away in sheets, and the creature emerged as a suggestion before it became a form. A shoulder like a ridge, a spine ridged and knotted, plated with frost-burned hide. Its size was difficult to grasp, not because it was vast, but because it refused proportion, as if the ice slid off it, unable to agree on scale. Where flesh showed, it was cross-hatched with scars. Deep clefts healed wrong, puckered seams where something had torn free and been forced back. It was hunted. Allard breathed. The creature's chest rose. Fell. The sound was a low thunder, muffled by ice and time, a breath taken after a very long refusal. One miner dropped his pick. We didn't mean... The creature opened its eyes. They were not eyes as men understand them. They were facets, layered, clouded, refracting light into dull rainbows that painted the snow with oil-slick color. They did not focus outward. They turned inward first, as if checking itself against memory. Confusion rippled through its bulk, followed by a surge of fury, so sudden the air cracked. The glacier split. Men fell, scrambling, their cries thin and easily swallowed. The creature tore free in a storm of ice, its movement awkward at first, like a limb relearning purpose. It roared then, not a challenge, but a grievance. The sound carried with it the echo of drums beaten by hands that had long since become dust. Go! Allard shouted. Leave it! But greed is a stubborn liturgy. One miner lunged for the black metal vein, for proof, for claim. The creature's attention snapped to him with frightening precision. A limb, too jointed, too deliberate, lashed out. The man vanished beneath snow and shadow. There was no blood, only silence. The ledger burned cold against Allard's chest. Why are you awake? Allard shouted, the words torn from him by wind and terror. Why now? The creature's gaze found him, and with it came a flood of images, men in furs and bone, faces painted with ash, surrounding this very place. Fires burned blue with ritual. They sang not to summon, but to bind. The creature had risen once before, tearing valleys open in its rage. It had taken a coalition of tribes, enemies made brothers by necessity, to drive it back. They had not killed it. They had erased it, buried it beneath ice and story, beneath forgetting, the only mercy strong enough to hold. Sleep. Allard whispered, though the word felt foolish now. The creature answered with a memory that tasted of iron. They struck me, it seemed to say, not in words but in weight. They carved me with belief and broke me with names. A miner ran past Allard, sobbing prayers. The creature did not pursue. It turned instead to the exposed vein, to the wound in the mountain. It pressed a scarred hand to the black metal and shuddered. Recognition. This was what it called it back. The old bait, the old sin. Greed. Allard murmured. It always wakes what should sleep. The creature tore the vein free in a roar of collapsing stone. The mountain convulsed. Snow and ice poured down the slopes. The miners scattered like insects, their shouts lost the avalanche. Allard stood rooted, the ledger open in his hands, pages flipping to a passage that bled fresh ink. The erased one rises, confused, enraged, the old war resumes. Listen to me, Allard pleaded, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming retreat. They are gone, the ones who bound you. Their names are dust. The creature loomed over him, towering, its breath a freezing gale that rhymed Allard's lashes with ice. It lifted a limb scarred by a weapon that had been driven in and twisted again. The wound glowed faintly, as if remembering heat. Names do not die. The creature pressed into him. They are buried. Allard felt the truth of it settle in his bones. The ledger was not merely a record of beasts. It was a reliquary of old wars, of things sealed by belief and loosened by forgetting. Each chapter was a lock undone. "What do you want?" he asked, voice barely his own. The creature turned its gaze downslope, toward valleys threaded with roads and lights like spilled constellations, toward warmth, toward noise, to finish what was interrupted. The ice beneath Allard's feet cracked. He stumbled back as the creature took its first true step into the present age. With each movement, the mountain shed itself, releasing centuries of pressure in a white roar. Far below, a river changed its course. As Allard fled, clutching the ledger, he felt the ink pulse, eager, complicit. The book wanted this. It wanted the world reminded. At the ridge, he turned once more. The creature stood silhouetted against the breaking sky, scars glowing like constellations, its breath steaming as it drew in the scent of a changed world. In the ledger, a new line wrote itself, the letters carving deep as wounds. The ground opens. The dead war walks. Behind him, somewhere far below the ice line, something answered, a low, answering call, as if other buried things had heard and were beginning to stir. Chapter 7. The wings that blocked out the sun. Morning broke, and then it stopped, not gently, not with clouds or rain, but as if the day itself had been interrupted mid-breath. The sun climbed no higher than a dull coin pressed behind gauze, and the fields lay beneath a light that refused to warm. Roosters crowed once and fell silent. Dogs tucked their tails and crept under porches. Somewhere far above, something vast adjusted its weight, and the sky learned fear. They would later call it the day without noon. Brother Allard arrived as the light stalled, the ledger tight against his ribs, its spine humming like a held note. The village lay spread across the plain like an offering. Thatched roofs, tilled earth, the slow geometry of a life lived outward toward the sky. He felt the wrongness immediately. Shadows lay in places that did not match the sun, angled as if cast by an unseen hand. Even the wind moved cautiously, slipping low, unwilling to rise. An old man stood in the road, hat clutched to his chest. "It's coming again," he whispered, though the air was still. "I remember." "Remember what?" Allard asked. The man's eyes tracked something that was not yet visible. "The sound," he said. "Not thunder, not wind. Feathers." The ledger opened of its own accord. A day that refused the sun. The wings passed overhead. What lived beneath them learned how small it was. A hush spread outward from the village like a stain. Cows ceased chewing. Horses stamped once, twice, then froze, their breath fogging in shallow bursts. Children stopped crying mid-sob, mouths open, as if listening to a story they had been warned never to hear. Then the shadows moved. They slid across the ground in a slow, deliberate sweep, swallowing fences, fields, and homes without sound. The light dimmed further, pressed thin and gray, and the air thickened with a pressure that made ears ache and hearts falter. Allard looked up. At first, he saw only cloud. Then the clouds bent. Something passed between earth and sun. So vast the mind refused to hold it whole. Wings, yes, wings, but not the clean arcs of birds. These were layered, ragged at the edges, their membranes stitched with veins thick as ropes. Each beat displaced the sky, pushing air downward in waves that flattened grass and bough trees. Feathers, if they were feathers, drifted down, black and heavy, smoking faintly where they touched the ground. "It's not flying," someone whispered. "It's eclipsing." The creature did not descend. It did not need to. Its presence alone altered the land. Shadows beneath it deepened, becoming places rather than absences. In those shadows, things shifted, roots curling tighter, stones sweating cold, the earth remembering older pressures. "What is it?" a woman asked, clutching her child. Allard could not answer. The ledger offered no name, only consequence. The wings beat again, and with them came a sound, not a cry, but a resonance that settled into bone. It was a sound of altitude made manifest, of a thing so accustomed to height that the ground itself felt intrusive. People fell to their knees, not in worship, but in submission to gravity's sudden reminder. A farmer screamed as his roof collapsed inward, beams bending under invisible weight. Another man ran, only to stop short as a shadow detached itself for a heartbeat and lagged behind, stretching, grasping, before snapping back into place. "It's watching," the old man breathed. From above. "No," Allard said, voice hoarse. From beyond. The wings shifted, angling. Light speared briefly through a rending cloud and membrane, illuminating a vast underside marked with scars, long pale furrows that crossed and recrossed, each one a memory of something that had tried, once, to bring it down. Hooks, ballista bolts, fire borne upward in desperate prayers. The scars had healed. The land beneath had not. Why here? Allard shouted into the dim. Why us? The answer came not in words, but in history pressed into him. Migrations halted, forests flattened by shadow alone, rivers diverted as creatures fled the sky. Entire regions left barren not by claw or flame, but by the simple fact of being beneath. Crops failed where the sun forgot how to linger. Children grew pale and fearful, their games shrinking inward. The land learned to expect less light, and offered less life in return. "This place remembers," a voice murmured beside him. Allard turned. A girl stood there, eyes too old for her face, black feather clutched in her fist. "It's been here before," she said. "My grandmother said the ground went sour after. Nothing grew right." The wings beat again, closer now, and the village groaned. Wells cracked. Windows imploded. The air smelled of ozone and old storms. Livestock collapsed where they stood, not dead, but emptied of motion, as if they had been pressed flat. "Get inside," someone screamed, though there was nowhere to hide from the sky. Allard felt the ledger burn cold. He opened it, pages whipping in the displaced air. Ink bled into shapes that struggled to be letters. The sky-bearer passes. Noon denied. The land learned shadow. He looked up once more and saw, between the wings, a suggestion of a body, long, impossibly balanced, its mass distributed across air as if supported by something more than physics. Where a head might be, there was only a darker density, a knot in the gloom that suggested awareness without features. "It doesn't see us," Allard whispered. "We are beneath notice." The girl shook her head. "No," she said. "We are beneath choice." The wings angled away, slowly, reverently, as if the creature were passing over an altar it already marked. Light began to seep back into the world, weak and stunned. The sun resumed its climb, though it seemed reluctant, as if uncertain it was still welcome. When the shadow finally lifted, the damage remained. Fields lay flattened, soil compacted into lifeless crust. Trees leaned at permanent angles, their leaves yellowing within hours. Animals that rose did so hesitantly, eyes dull, refusing to look skyward again. And across the village, a line had been drawn, an invisible boundary beyond which nothing would thrive. They would rebuild. They always did. But the land would never forget. That night, Allard sat alone at the edge of the plain. The ledger lay open beside him. ink drying at last. Above, the stars seemed thinner, farther away, as if the sky had been stretched and not fully returned. He noticed then a new shadow crossing the moon, smaller, distant, but unmistakably winged. In the ledger, a final line etched itself, slow and deep. The sky has many layers. Allard closed his eyes, knowing, deep in his marrow, that what had passed was not singular. It was a herald, and somewhere far above, other wings were turning, learning the shape of the sun. Chapter 8. The Predator That Hunts the Soul. The first sign was not death, but distance. People returned from the encounter walking, breathing, speaking, but something had stepped out of alignment. Their eyes lingered too long on reflections. Their voices echoed faintly, as if answering from somewhere just behind themselves. Loved ones, said the survivors, fell hollowed, like houses left standing after the fire had learned their shape. Brother Allard arrived in a town that had begun to doubt mirrors. They had covered them with cloth, turned them to the walls, shattered some outright, and buried the shards beneath thresholds. The air inside homes felt crowded despite the emptiness. Lamps burned day and night, though no one claimed comfort from the light. Even prayer had thinned here, its words framed before reaching the tongue. Allard felt it immediately, the sensation of being followed by something that refused footsteps. The ledger was quiet, which frightened him more than hunger. He found the first survivor seated alone in the chapel, hands folded, eyes fixed on the stone floor. The man's body was whole, healthy, too healthy, perhaps, as if spared by intent rather than chance. "Tell me what you saw," Allard said gently. The man swallowed. "I didn't see it," he whispered. "That's the problem." "Did it speak?" "No," his fingers tightened. "It listened." The folklore called it many names. The hollow stalker, the white listener, the thing between reflections. None agreed on its shape, only its method. It did not chase. It did not strike. It waited in thresholds, in pauses, in moments where the soul leaned forward without knowing why. "You feel it before," the man continued, voice trembling, "like standing at the edge of a thought you shouldn't finish." The ledger stirred. A town without shadows. The soul hunter walks. Bodies unbroken. Essence devoured. At dusk, Allard walked the streets alone. The town had learned avoidance the way others learned etiquette. Doors closed softly. Windows darkened. Conversation stopped when he passed, not out of suspicion, but fear of attracting attention. Silence here was camouflage. He reached the square where the mirror once stood. It had been a public thing, a polished slab of silvered glass raised generations ago, so the town could see itself whole during festivals. Now it lay shattered, its fragments swept into a circle and ringed with salt and ash. Allard felt the pull immediately, a gentle inward tug, like gravity remembered. "You don't have to look," came a whisper from behind him. He turned. A woman stood there, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red not from tears but from watching herself too long. "It already knows you're here," she said. "It knows everyone who wonders." "What does it take?" Allard asked. She hesitated. "The part that watches," she said finally. "The part that says I am." Night fell improperly, thick and muffled. The moon rose distorted, blurred at the edges, as though seen through glass breathed upon by something warm. Allard felt the town hold its breath. That was when the reflections began to move, not the reflections of bodies, but of absence. Dark shapes rippled across windows where no one stood. Pools reflected silhouettes that lagged a second behind their owners. In the broken circle of the mirror shards, something gathered. Allard knelt. The ledger opened before him. "What are you?" he whispered. The answer came not in sound, but in subtraction. He felt memories loosen, not personal ones, but structural truths. The certainty of being singular, the assumption that thought belonged only to the thinker. Something was tasting him, careful, discerning, like a scholar selecting which page to tear free. "I am what remains when you stop looking away." The presence pressed into him. A large reflection formed slowly in the largest shard. His face, yes, but dimmed, blurred, as if seen through deep water. Behind it, another outline sharpened. It had no face. Where features should have been, there was depth, layered, receding, like mirrors facing mirrors into infinity. It leaned close enough that Allard felt breath that was not air, "Why don't you kill?" he asked, voice barely intact. "Killing ends a meal," it replied. The townspeople screamed as one lights shattered across the square. Glass burst outward. Shards rang like bells struck too hard. The presence expanded, not growing larger but closer, folding space inward until every reflection led back to it. A child ran into the square, clutching a broken mirror piece. "Mama," he cried. The thing turned. Allard moved without thinking. He slammed the ledger shut and pressed it to his chest, shouting words he did not remember learning, names older than fear, older than selfhood. The air thickened. The presence recoiled, not wounded but resisted. The child collapsed, sobbing. The mirror shard fell, dull and empty. The predator retreated, not gone, never gone, but folded back into the spaces between reflections, into the thin seam where identity loosens. Silence returned, heavier than before. At dawn, the town emerged carefully. Survivors gathered in the square, staring at each other as if counting souls by process of elimination. "How do we know if it took something?" someone asked. No one answered. Allard opened the ledger. The ink trembled, reluctant. The soul hunter fed. One interrupted. The watcher marked. He felt it then, a sensation like standing behind himself, like being followed by his own shadow, thinking independently. When he passed the window, he did not look. That night, alone in his room, Allard felt compelled, drawn, gently, inexorably, to the small mirror above the basin. His hand shook as he lifted the cloth. His reflection stared back, a fraction of a second too late. Behind it, something smiled without a mouth. And somewhere deep within the ledger, a page turned itself, eager for what would command. EXT. Chapter 9. The animal worshipped as a god. They did not kneel because they believed. It was because standing felt unsafe. The valley had learned this posture long, before memory learned names. Stone steps smoothed by generations of trembling knees led to shrines that faced the mountain's throat, where fog pooled like a hell breath. Bells were never rung here. Sound, the elders said, taught it where you were. Allard arrived at dawn and found the altars freshly fed. Blood steamed in shallow bowls. Grain lay scattered in careful spirals. Strips of cloth, once sleeves, once veils, fluttered from hooks like skins trying to remember their owners. No symbol marked the shrines. No idol shaped its likeness. They had learned not to try. To carve it was to invite correction. "Is it a god?" Allard asked the old woman, sweeping ash into a line that pointed away from a village. She did not look at him. "Gods listen," she said. "This one passes." The ledger in Allard's satchel felt heavier here, as if gravity itself bowed. By noon the fog thinned, revealing the mountain's face, a cliff split by a long, dark seam. The elders called it the mouth. Children were taught not to count the teeth of stone around it. Counting implied curiosity. Curiosity implied hunger. "They say it walks at dusk," Allard said. The woman paused. "Walks is a word for us," she replied. "It moves." She finally met his gaze. Her eyes were milky, filmed by years of watching, without looking directly. "We built shrines so it would know we remembered," she whispered. "When we stopped remembering, it reminded us." The disappearances had begun 3 winters ago. Quietly, respectfully, a shepherd gone between one step and the next. A child whose footprints entered the river and did not continue. No blood, no struggle, just subtraction, as clean as erasing chalk from slate. Allard followed the procession path toward the highest shrine. It was older than the rest, its stones blackened by offerings burned rather than buried. A circle of posts surrounded it, each carved with tally marks that did not add up. "What are these?" he asked a young man who lingered at the edge, wringing his hands. "Days that passed us by," the man said. "Not days that came." At the shrine's center lay a bowl of bone. Allard knelt, opening the ledger. The ink bloomed eagerly, letters forming with the assurance of long rehearsal. The passing god, the animal crowned by fear. It does not guard, it is appeased. A low sound rolled through the valley, then not a roar, not a call, but the vibration of something vast adjusting its weight. Birds fled the trees in a single, panicked exhale. The elders lowered their heads. "It knows you've come," the woman murmured. What is it? Allard pressed. Older than our names, she said. Younger than the mountain. It learned us the way water learns stone. Dusk bled in wrong, staining the fog a bruised violet. Shadows stretched uphill instead of down. The mouth darkened. It seemed widening not by opening but by remembering how. For within came a sound like breath passing over fur. Allard felt it then, the pressure of attention without intention, like a weather system deciding where to fall. The animal emerged not fully, never fully, but enough. A vast outline sliding against the cliff, hide patterned in marks that echoed the shrine tallies. Eyes like hollows, not empty but waiting. A crown of bone and horn fused naturally to its skull, as if the mountain had tried to grow a king and failed. No one spoke. God, Allard whispered, unsure to whom. The thing paused. The fog thinned around its head, revealing a mouth too wide, lined with structures not quite teeth. Filters, perhaps, for sorting offerings from mistakes. We called it that, the woman breathed, so it wouldn't ask for more. A child stepped forward, unbidden, carrying a bowl too small for what it demanded. The elders hissed, reaching, but the animals shifted, and the ground trembled them still. The child held out the bowl, hand shaking. Please, he said, not to the beast, but to the world. The animal lowered its head. Its breath smelled of old iron and rain. It did not take the offering. It listened. Allard felt the ledger burn cold against his ribs. It wants memory, he said suddenly, not blood. The woman nodded once. That's why it takes us whole. The animal raised its head, eyes fixing on Allard. In that gaze was no malice, no mercy, only expectation. Worship had shaped it as surely as fear shapes prayer. They had taught it the language of disappearance. What happens if we stop? Allard asked softly. The answer came as movement. The animal stepped forward, and the fog tore like cloth. Where its foot touched, grass browned, then paled, then forgot how to grow. The valley leaned away from it, terrified soil pulling at roots. We tried, the woman said, tears cutting clean paths down her face. For one season, we remembered ourselves instead. The animal's head turned toward the village. No, Allard said, louder now. He stepped into the open, heart hammering, and raised a ledger. You are not a god. The thing stilled. You are an animal, he continued, voice shaking but steadying with each word, taught to feed on fear, crowned by our silence. The animal's mouth opened. Sound poured out, not a roar but a history layered and heavy. The shrine shook, bones rattled. The fog boiled. Say it again, the woman begged. Say it like you mean it. Allard did. He named it, not the true name. That was not as to hold, but a shape of truth, a refusal wrapped in breath. The ledger flared, ink bleeding through pages like veins. The animal recoiled, not wounded but confused. Worship had taught it to expect offerings, not opposition. It stepped back, then back again, sinking into mouth as the mountain seemed to close around it reluctantly. Silence fell, stunned and fragile. No one cheered. At dawn, they found the shrines untouched, and the village missing one shadow from every doorstep. Allard stood alone, ledger open. A new line wrote itself, slow and deliberate. Appeasement is a kind of prayer. Refusal is a kind of hunger. As he turned to leave the valley, he felt it watching, not from the mountain, but from the rituals still clinging to the people's hands. Somewhere behind him, stones shifted. The passing god had learned a new offering, and it was already on its W. Chapter 10. The truth that breathes among us. The final truth does not arrive screaming. It exhales beside you, warm and patient, as if it has always shared your breath. By the time Allard reached the lowlands, the air itself had learned to hesitate. Roads bent where they should have run straight. Birds paused mid-flight, reconsidering the shape of the sky. The ledger at his side no longer needed to be opened. Its weight spoke, pressing against his ribs like a second heart beating out of time. These were never monsters, he murmured to the empty road, and the road listened. Villages appeared intact yet subtly wrong, like faces remembered imperfectly. Doors were narrower than before. Windows watched more than they revealed. People moved with careful economy, as though conserving gestures for a winter that would never end. They knew. They always knew. In the tavern at Blackfun, conversation thinned when Allard entered. Cups paused halfway to mouths. A fire guttered low, ashamed of its light. "You carry it," a man said without looking up. Allard did not ask how he knew. "I carry a record," he replied. The man's voice dropped. "Same thing." An old woman leaned close, breath smelling of herbs and old promises. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "The beasts." Allard closed his eyes. Images rose unbidden. Wings blotting out noon, eyes without sight seeing everything, a God-shaped hunger stepping softly through fog. "No," he said. "They were never meant to leave." A shudder passed through the room, communal and intimate. Someone began to pray, then stopped halfway through the first word. They were allowed. Allard continued. Softer now. Invited. Federal remembered into being. A young girl at the hearth spoke, without turning. "My mother says we made them so we wouldn't have to look at ourselves." Silence accepted this. The ledger opened on its own. Its pages had changed. Where once there were names and dates, there were now spaces, breathing gaps between words. The ink pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. "We blame the dark," the ledger wrote, but it was our eyes that closed. Allard left before dawn. He walked until villages thinned into scattered houses, then into solitary dwellings clinging to hillsides like afterthoughts. Everywhere, the same signs, offerings half abandoned, rituals performed out of habit rather than belief, fear preserved like a family heirloom. At a crossroads shrine, 3 stones and a bowl of rainwater, a traveler waited. "You're late," the traveler said. Allard stiffened. "I don't know you." The traveler smiled gently. "You know what I am." The air tightened. "I am not a creature," the traveler continued. "I am the permission." Allard felt the world tilt, just slightly. Permission for what? For them, the traveler said, gesturing, not outward, but inward. Bone remembers what was shaped for. Fear remembers where it was learned. You do not need monsters when you cultivate the conditions. "Why show me?" Allard asked. "Because you write things down," the traveler replied. "And writing makes it real." The ledger grew hot. "They are not omens," Allard said, voice rising. "They are consequences." The traveler's eyes softened. "Exactly." Night fell too quickly. Stars appeared in unfamiliar arrangements, as though the sky had been rearranged while no one was watching. From the forest edge came sounds, not footsteps, not breath, but the careful adjustment of something very near. Allard backed away. "They're here." "They always were," the traveler said, "breathing among you, watching how you choose." A whisper threaded through the trees, layered and plural. We were allowed. Shapes moved, never fully seen, never absent. A ripple in shadow, a pause in sound. The sense of being counted, assessed, remembered. "They learned from us," Allard said hoarsely. "Yes," the traveler agreed. "We taught them fear and called it reverence. We taught them hunger and named it survival." The ledger's pages began to turn faster now, windless. Entries wrote themselves in every margin, every blank space filling with the same sentence, over and over in different hands. "The horror is not the beast. The horror is the door left open." Allard fell to his knees. "How do we close it?" The traveler stepped back, dissolving into the dark like breath on glass. "You don't," the voice echoed. "You learn to live knowing it's there." From the hilltop, Allard saw lights flicker across the lowlands, villages settling into sleep. And between them, moving slowly, almost tenderly, were presences, not invading, not hunting, simply existing, as natural now as rain. A child laughed somewhere. A dog whimpered. A bell rang once, then stopped. The ledger snapped shut. On its cover, new words had appeared, etched deep enough to scar the binding. "They breathe because you do." Allard stood alone, as dawn bled gray across the world. In the distance, something vast shifted its weight, unseen but undeniable. The air warmed with familiar, patient exhale. And behind him, close enough to share his shadow, another breath answered BAC. "K."